The dust tastes like betrayal. Sheriff Kalen Blackwood rides with the law on his chest and a war in his heart. The badge is a cold, five-pointed star of polished tin, a stark contrast to the sun-warmed buckskin he wears beneath his shirt. It feels heavier today. The tracks in the ruddy earth are plain to his eye. The very skills his uncle taught him, now leading him toward a terrible reckoning. They lead away from the smoldering ruin of the Miller homestead and point east, toward the jagged spine of the Dragoon Mountains, toward the hidden canyon where the remnants of his mother's people, the Chiricahua Apache, hold to the old ways. The tracks lead to his own blood, to the man who taught him how to hunt, how to read the land, how to be a man. Now he must hunt him. He knows, with a certainty that chills him deeper than the high desert wind, that he rides to arrest the architect of this new bloodshed. He rides to arrest his uncle, Taza. Danger's close, and a rescue might be at hand. Before we see if justice or peril finds them, share in the comments. What's your favorite story about someone being saved against the odds? And if you're rooting for them, hit like and subscribe. And with that grim knowledge settling in his bones, his life, the fragile peace of the territory, and the fate of two peoples were set on a course for collision. The sun was a merciless hammer in the sky, beating down on the town of Redemption, a name that had always tasted like irony on Cale's tongue. There was precious little redemption to be found in its dusty streets, only hardscrabble existence and a festering resentment that clung to the air like smoke. He had been sheriff for 2 years, a choice made by a territorial governor desperate to placate both the new settlers flooding the valley and the Apache bands who still considered it their ancestral home. Cale was the perfect, impossible compromise, the son of a white trader and a Chiricahua woman, fluent in both languages, comfortable in both a saddle and at a negotiating table. He was a man who belonged to two worlds and was truly at home in neither. The townsfolk called him Sheriff Blackwood to his face, but their eyes, and their whispers in the saloon, often used another word, half-breed. To his mother's people, he was Kalen, son of Sparrow, but his tin star was a symbol of the white man's law that had taken everything from them. He was a bridge, and he felt the constant strain of being pulled apart from both sides. The Miller homestead was a testament to that strain. He'd arrived just after dawn, drawn by a pillar of greasy black smoke. The cabin was a blackened ribcage, the air thick with the stench of charred pine and something horribly sweet. John Miller and his boy, barely a man of 16, lay where they had fallen in the yard, their bodies bristling with arrows fletched in the distinctive style of Taza's band. It was a message, brutal and clear. It was a rejection of the lines drawn on maps, of the treaties signed and broken, of the slow strangulation of a people. Cale dismounted and walked the scene, his jaw tight. His deputy, a young, earnest man named Ben Carter, looked pale and sick. "Sheriff, it's a massacre." Cale knelt, his fingers tracing the edge of a moccasin print in the blood-soaked dust. It was Taza's size, a small, unique wear pattern on the heel he'd recognize anywhere. "No, Ben," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "A massacre is what happened at Sand Creek. This is an attack. There's a difference." He didn't explain it. He couldn't. The difference was in the intent. One was indiscriminate slaughter. The other was targeted, a violent answer to a long list of grievances. The Millers had been encroaching, pushing their fences farther into the foothills than agreed, diverting water from a creek the Apache depended on. Cale had warned them. He had tried to mediate. But John Miller was a man full of righteous conviction and racial certainty. He had laughed in Cale's face. Now, that laughter was silenced forever. As Cale prepared to follow the trail, Elias Thorne rode up with two of his ranch hands, his face a thundercloud. Thorne was the town's unofficial patriarch, the owner of the biggest cattle operation in the valley, a man whose wealth gave his opinions the weight of law. He saw Cale kneeling by the bodies, and his lip curled in a sneer. "Well, Sheriff," Thorne's voice dripped with condescension, "looks like your kin have been busy. I suppose you'll tell us this was just a misunderstanding over some water." Cale stood slowly, his height giving him a slight advantage over the stout rancher. He kept his face a blank mask, a skill learned in childhood to hide the sting of insults. They were killed, Thorn. I'll find who did it. You'll find them. Thorn laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You know damn well who did it. It's that murdering uncle of yours. Taza. He should have been strung up years ago. We need a posse, Blackwood. A real one. We need to ride into those hills and burn them out, root and stem. Finish the job. The casual cruelty of the words, the genocidal ease with which they were spoken, sent a hot spike of anger through Cale's chest. It was the same anger he'd seen in his uncle's eyes. He banked it down, turning it to ice. There will be no posse, Thorn. I will handle this according to the law. The law. Thorn spat on the ground near Cale's feet. Your law is what's getting us killed. You're soft on them because you're one of them. You can't be trusted. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Ben shifted his weight, his hand moving near his pistol, but Cale gave a minute shake of his head. This wasn't a fight to be won with guns. Not yet. I'm a sheriff of this county, Cale said, his voice level and cold as a stone at the bottom of a river. That means I uphold the law for everyone, white and Apache. I'll bring the man responsible to justice. My way. He turned his back on Thorn, a calculated dismissal, and mounted his horse. He looked east to the mountains that held his past and now his future. He had to ride in, not as a nephew, not as the son of Sparrow, but as the law. He had to look his uncle in the eye and demand an accounting for the two bodies lying in the dirt. He knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that Taza would give him one, and it would not be an apology. It would be a declaration of war. The fragile cabin of his life, built precariously between two opposing worlds, was beginning to splinter. The ride into the Dragoons was a journey through memory. Every rock formation, every twisted juniper held a story. It was here Taza had taught him to track deer, to find water where none seemed to exist, to listen to the language of the wind. Taza, his mother's brother, had been more of a father to him than the feckless traitor who had given him his name and little else. He had been the one to teach Cale the Chiricahua ways, to instill in him a pride in his Apache blood when the world outside the canyon sought only to shame him for it. He found the camp in a narrow, well-hidden valley, the smoke of its cook fires mingling with the scent of pine and rock. The sentries, perched invisibly in the cliffs above, would have seen him coming for miles. They let him pass. He was still Calen to them for now. He dismounted at the edge of the camp and waited. Warriors, young men with fire in their eyes, watched him with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. Their faces were hard, their hands never far from the knives at their belts. They saw the badge, not the man. Older men and women looked at him with a deep, bottomless sorrow. They saw the boy he had been and the man he had become, and they mourned the distance between the two. After a long silence, Taza emerged from his wickiup. He was not a tall man, but he possessed an undeniable presence. His face was a roadmap of hardship and defiance, his long, gray streak hair held back by a simple leather band. He moved with the unhurried grace of a mountain cat, his eyes dark and intelligent. They were his mother's eyes. You were the metal star in my camp, nephew, Taza said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the clearing. It was not a question. 2 men are dead, Taza, Cale replied, his own voice sounding foreign and harsh in the quiet of the canyon. A man and his son, at the Miller place. Taza's expression did not change. He gestured to a spot by his fire. Seat, you have ridden far. It was a test. To refuse was an insult. To accept was to step, for a moment, back into their world. Cale walked to the fire and sat cross-legged on the ground, the star on his chest feeling like a brand. He felt the eyes of the entire village on his back. An elder woman brought him a gourd of water, her face impassive. He drank, his throat raw. The white man Miller was a thief, Taza said finally, seating himself opposite Cale. He stole our water. His fences were like a knife, cutting the deer from their ancient paths. He was warned. He was a homesteader, uncle. He had a piece of paper from the government that said the land was his. A bitter laugh escaped Taza's lips. The government. The government is a great thief that gives smaller thieves pieces of what it has stolen. That paper means nothing. The rocks in the river do not read paper. It means something in town, Cale countered, keeping his voice even. It means murder. I saw the tracks, uncle. I saw the arrows. Then you saw justice, Taza said, his gaze unwavering. The boy was unfortunate, but he stood with his father. A man's son must share his path. The coldness of the statement was a physical blow. Cale remembered the boy's face, slack-jawed in the dust. Unfortunate. He was 16. I was 16 when I saw soldiers ride down my village and kill my sister. Your aunt, Taza reminded him, his voice softening just a fraction. I was a boy, too. No one called the soldiers murderers. They were called heroes. They were given medals. The weight of history of 100 such atrocities pressed down on Cale. He had no answer for that. He had never had an answer. All he had was the law he had sworn to uphold, a flimsy shield against an ocean of bad blood. The law I serve says a man has a right to a trial, Cale said, forcing the words out. It doesn't matter what Miller did. The ones who killed him must answer for it. Taza leaned forward slightly, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. And who will try them? A jury of white ranchers who hate us. A judge who sees us as savages? What trial is that? It is a ceremony for a hanging. He looked directly at Cale, his eyes searching. You know this, Calen. You know the truth. You try to build a bridge, but the river is too wide and the current too strong. It will wash you away. I have to ask you, Taza. Did you lead the raid? Cale's heart pounded against his ribs. This was the moment. Taza held his gaze for a long time. The fire crackled between them. I'm the war chief of my people. Their hunger is my hunger. Their anger is my anger. The blood that was spilled is on my hands. Does that answer your question, Sheriff? It did. It was a confession and a challenge, wrapped in the dignity of a man who believed utterly in his cause. Cale felt a profound sense of loss, a severing. The boy who had learned to hunt in these hills was gone, replaced by a man with a tin star and an impossible duty. He stood up, the movement stiff. Then you leave me no choice. There is always a choice, nephew, Taza said, his voice laced with a deep sadness. You made yours when you pinned that star to your chest. You chose their world over ours. I chose peace, Cale shot back, his control finally cracking. I chose a way for us to live without more killing. There is no peace, Taza said, rising to his feet as well. The warriors in the camp began to stir, their hands now firmly on their weapons. There is only this land and the men who would take it from us. You stand with them. So be it. Cale backed away slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. This isn't over, Taza. No, Taza agreed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the canyon. It is just beginning. Cale turned and walked to his horse, every step an effort. He did not look back. He mounted and rode out of the canyon, the unseen eyes of the sentries following him like ghosts. He had gone seeking a criminal and had found a patriarch defending his people. He had gone seeking answers and had been given a declaration of war. The ride back to redemption was longer and lonelier than the ride out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and red, the color of fire and blood. He knew what he had to do, and the knowledge was a bitter poison in his gut. He had to arrest his own uncle, and when he did, all of hell would follow. Back in redemption, the town was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Thorne had been busy, stoking the fires of fear and hatred. Men gathered in knots on the street corners, their faces grim, rifles held with a new familiarity. The saloon was buzzing not with its usual rough camaraderie, but with angry, mutinous talk. Cale could feel the change as soon as he rode down the main street. The stares were no longer just suspicious. They were openly hostile. He was the enemy within. He went straight to his office, a small, solid building of adobe and timber that contained his desk, a cot, and 2 holding cells. Ben was there, pacing anxiously. Sheriff, Thorne's been telling everyone you went up there to warn them, not to catch them. He's saying you're protecting your uncle, Ben said, his young face creased with worry. Let him talk, Cale said, pulling off his gloves. He felt exhausted, bone-weary in a way that had nothing to do with the long ride. Did the circuit judge get my wire? He did. Judge Miller will be here in 3 days' time. What are we gonna do, Cale? The whole town's about to boil over. Cale sank into his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He stared at the wall, at the framed piece of paper that declared him sheriff of Verde County. It seemed like a mockery. I'm going to do my job, Ben. I'm going to make an arrest. Ben's eyes widened. You found him? You know who did it? I know. Cale didn't elaborate. He couldn't bring himself to say the name aloud, to give voice to the betrayal he was about to commit. But I'm not taking a posse. It would be a slaughter. I'm going alone. Alone? That's suicide. Ben protested. They'll kill you before you get within a mile of the camp. They'll see a posse as an act of war. They might see one man as something else. Cale reasoned, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. I need you here, Ben. I need you to keep a lid on this town. Don't let Thorne do anything stupid. Deputize a few good men if you have to. Men you can trust. Not Thorne's cronies. Men like Olson the blacksmith or Henderson from the livery. Men who don't spook easy. And what do I tell them? Tell them the law is coming, Cale said, his voice flat. He stood and walked to the gun rack, taking down a repeating rifle. He checked the action, his movements economical and precise. He was separating himself from the decision, focusing on the mechanics of the task ahead. Ammunition, water, rations. He was no longer a nephew or a man torn between two worlds. He was a tool of the law, a mechanism for an arrest. It was the only way he could stomach it. The next day, before the sun had crested the eastern mountains, Cale rode out again. This time he did not take the main trail. He used the old ways, the hidden paths Taza had shown him, weaving through arroyos and canyons that were invisible from the valley floor. He was not Kalen, the son of Sparrow, nor was he Sheriff Blackwood. He was a hunter. His prey was his own kin. He tethered his horse in a box canyon a mile from Taza's camp and proceeded on foot, moving with a silence that was his birthright. He carried the rifle in his hands, its weight a grim comfort. He circled the camp, observing. The mood was different now. The warriors were not just watchful. They were preparing. He saw them sharpening arrowheads, checking bowstrings, painting their faces and ponies for battle. His visit had been the final signal. They knew the white men would be coming. They were ready to meet them. His plan, if it could be called that, was desperate and simple. He would wait for nightfall for the camp to settle. He would not try to sneak in. He would walk in directly to Taza's wickiup. He was banking on one thing, the complex bond of respect and family that still existed between them, however frayed. An armed posse would be met with a hail of arrows. A single man, his nephew, might be granted a final conversation. As darkness fell, blanketing the canyon in velvet black, Cale began his approach. The campfires cast dancing shadows on the cliff walls. The sound of a single drum began to beat, a slow, steady rhythm like the heart of the mountain itself. He stepped out of the shadows and into the firelight. He was spotted immediately. A cry went up. Warriors grabbed their weapons. In seconds, he was surrounded, the tips of a dozen arrows aimed at his heart. He held his rifle pointed at the ground, his other hand raised, palm out. He did not speak. He just stood there, waiting, his gaze fixed on Taza's lodge. The flap of the wickiup was pushed aside, and Taza stepped out. He looked at Cale, then at the warriors surrounding him. He said a single word in Chiricahua. The arrowheads lowered, but the tension remained, a palpable thing, tight as a bowstring. You have come back, Taza stated. You are either very brave or very foolish. I've come to do what I said I would do, Cale said, his voice clear in the night air. Taza, war chief of the Chiricahua, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of John and Thomas Miller. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The audacity of it stunned them into silence. Arresting Taza? Here, in the heart of his power, surrounded by his warriors? It was unthinkable. Taza's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of surprise, which was quickly replaced by a dark, grim amusement. You would arrest a whirlwind? You would put chains on a river? I'm not a man, nephew. I'm the anger of a people. You cannot arrest me. I can, Cale said softly. And I will. I'm asking you to come with me peacefully, to avoid more bloodshed. There will be bloodshed regardless, a young warrior snarled, stepping forward. His name was Geronimo, a name that would one day be feared across the territory, but now he was just a young man full of righteous fury. We should kill him now, uncle. He is a traitor to his blood. Be silent, Taza commanded, not taking his eyes off Kale. He studied his nephew's face, the set of his jaw, the resolve in his eyes. He saw not a traitor, but a man trapped in an impossible position, holding fast to the only code he had left. He saw the boy he had raised, now a man he had to fight. A deep, profound weariness seemed to settle over him. If I come with you, Taza said slowly, my warriors will not stand for it. They will follow. They will burn that town of yours to the ground to get me back. And if you don't, Kale countered, Thorn will bring 100 men up here with Gatling guns. They will hunt you down. They will kill the women, the children. They will destroy everything. You know I'm telling the truth. Come with me. Let me put you in my jail. It is the only place you will be safe from a lynch mob, and the only place this valley will be safe from a war. It was a terrible, paradoxical logic. The only way to save Taza from the white man's justice was to subject him to it. The only way to prevent a war was to give the town the villain it craved, and then protect that villain with his own life. Taza looked around at his people, at the hard, determined faces of his warriors, at the fearful eyes of the women clutching their children. He saw the path ahead, a bloody, hopeless war that would end, as they all did, in defeat and death. Perhaps his nephew was not a fool. Perhaps this was the only move left on the board, a sacrifice to buy time, to save the lives of those who looked to him for protection. You will be protecting me from your people, Taza said, a deep irony in his voice. And I will need you to protect your people from mine. It is a strange world you have built, Kalen. He turned to his warriors. Put down your weapons, he commanded. I will go with him. A roar of protest went up, but Taza silenced it with a raised hand. His authority was absolute. This is my path to walk. Do not follow. Not yet. Wait for a sign. He walked toward Kale, his back straight, his head held high. He stopped directly in front of his nephew. He was a chief, a warrior, a prisoner. I will not be shackled, he said, his voice low. You have my word, Kale replied. Together, they walked out of the camp, a sheriff and his prisoner, an uncle and his nephew. The silence they left behind was more menacing than any war cry. Kale knew he had not prevented a war. He had only postponed it, and he had just willingly locked himself in a cage with a wolf, with a lynch mob hammering on one side of the bars and an army of warriors on the other. The midnight hour was approaching fast. The journey back to redemption was a silent, somber procession of two. Kale rode in front, Taza behind him, unbound as promised. The trust was a fragile, unspoken thing between them. Taza had given his word not to flee, and Kale honored it by not treating him like a common criminal. Every mile that brought them closer to town tightened a knot of dread in Kale's stomach. He was leading his uncle, the man who was a living symbol of Apache resistance, into the heart of the enemy's camp. They arrived as the town was waking, the first rays of sun glinting off the tin roofs. Their appearance on the main street caused an immediate stir. Windows flew open. People stopped dead in their tracks, staring in disbelief. Kale, the half-breed sheriff, riding in with Taza, the feared Apache war chief, as his prisoner. Elias Thorne was the first to find his voice. He stormed out of the land office, his face purple with rage. Blackwood, what is the meaning of this? You bring that murderer into our town. Kale dismounted, positioning himself between Thorne and Taza. He's my prisoner, Thorne. He'll be held in my jail until Judge Miller arrives for the trial. Trial? Thorne scoffed, his voice rising to rally the growing crowd. He doesn't deserve a trial. He deserves a rope. We know what he did. He admitted it to you, didn't he? Men began to emerge from the saloon and the general store, their morning stupor replaced by a grim, collective purpose. They were armed, and their faces were hard with a thirst for vengeance. He'll get a trial according to the law, Kale said, his hand dropping to rest on his pistol. Ben Carter came running from the sheriff's office, a shotgun held ready in his hands, his face pale but resolute. He took up a position beside Cale. "You in what army, Sheriff?" Thorne sneered. "There are two of you. Look around. The good people of Redemption are tired of your Apache-loving ways. We'll see our own justice done." The crowd murmured in agreement, a low, ugly sound. They started to press forward, a human tide of anger. Cale stood his ground, his eyes scanning the faces, seeing not his neighbors, but a mob. Taze sat on his horse, impassive, his gaze distant, as if observing a distasteful but predictable ritual. "The first man who takes another step," Cale said, his voice ringing out with an authority he didn't feel, "will be arrested for interfering with a federal officer. The second man will be shot. Back off. Now." His tone, cold and final, gave them pause. The resolve in his eyes, the shotgun in Ben's hands, the sheer, unexpected fact that he was willing to kill them to protect an Apache, held them at bay. For a moment, Cale used the hesitation to act. "Ben, get him inside." Ben nodded, gesturing with the shotgun for Taza to dismount. Taza swung his leg over the horse and walked calmly toward the jail, his dignity a stark contrast to the snarling faces of the mob. He walked past Cale, and, for a fleeting second, their eyes met. There was no gratitude in Taza's gaze, no fear, only a deep, weary understanding. Cale backed slowly toward the office door, his Colt now in his hand. "This is my town, Thorne, my jail, and my prisoner. You are not touching him." He and Ben slipped inside, the heavy oak door booming shut behind them. Cale slid the thick iron bolt into place. He could hear Thorne shouting outside, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. Inside, the jail was quiet and cool. Taza stood in the center of the room, looking at the two cells that lined the far wall. They were cages. "Choose one," Cale said, his voice rough with strain. Taza walked to the cell on the left and stepped inside without being prompted. He turned and faced the bars. Cale followed him, the key heavy in his hand. The act of turning the key in the lock was the hardest thing he had ever done. The metallic click echoed in the small room, a sound of finality. It was the sound of a bridge burning, of a choice made absolute. "They will not wait for the judge," Taza said, his voice calm. He looked not at Cale, but through the barred window at the town outside. "They will come for me tonight. Let them try," Cale said, leaning the rifle against the wall by his desk. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The decision was made. The lines were drawn. All that was left was the fight. As the day wore on, the town grew quieter, but it was a tense, expectant silence. Men gathered in the saloon, their voices low and conspiratorial. Women pulled their children inside and bolted their doors. Redemption was holding its breath. Cale and Ben sat in the office, checking their weapons, rationing their ammunition. They had a dozen rifles and 4 shotguns, but they were only 2 men. Night fell like a shroud. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. The main street was dark and empty. Too empty. Cale stood by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "They're coming," he said softly. Ben joined him at the window. At the far end of the street, torches were being lit. A dark mass of men, at least 40 or 50 of them, began to move toward the jail. They were armed with rifles, shotguns, and something else, a heavy log, a makeshift battering ram. At their head was Elias Thorne, his face lit by the flickering torchlight, twisted into a mask of righteous fury. From his cell, Taza began to chant, a low, rhythmic death song of the Chiricahua. It was not a song of fear, but of defiance. It was a warrior's farewell to the world. The sound, ancient and mournful, filled the small office, a chilling counterpoint to the angry shouts of the mob outside. "Sheriff," Thorne's voice boomed, "send out the murderer, or we're coming in to get him." Cale took a deep breath. This was it, the breaking point. He looked at Ben, whose knuckles were white where he gripped his shotgun. "You don't have to do this, Ben. This isn't your fight." Ben looked from Cale to the cell, where Taza chanted, then back to the door where the mob was gathering. "You're the sheriff. I'm your deputy. You swore to uphold the law. I swore to back you up. Seems to me this is exactly my fight. A flicker of gratitude warmed Kale's chest. He was not entirely alone. He nodded. Stay away from the door. They'll try to shoot through it. The first heavy thud of the battering ram against the oak door shook the entire building. Splinters flew inward. Taz's chant grew louder, more powerful. Give him up, Blackwood, another voice yelled. Don't die for a savage. Kale raised his rifle, aiming at the door. The next time you hit that door, he yelled, his voice raw, I'll put a bullet through it. I promise you, it will find one of you. There was a moment of silence, then another, heavier crash. The wood groaned, cracking near the hinges. Kale fired. The rifle's roar was deafening in the enclosed space. A scream from outside told him his bullet had found its mark. The mob roared in fury. A volley of gunfire erupted, peppering the front of the jail. Bullets punched through the thick adobe walls, kicking up dust, whining through the air. Kale and Ben ducked down below the level of the windows. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was high-pitched, frantic, and terrifying. It was the sound of the church bell, ringing wildly in the dead of night. It was not a call to prayer. It was an alarm. Ben looked at Kale, his eyes wide with confusion. What is that? Before Kale could answer, a series of high, ululating cries echoed from the hills surrounding the town. La Crise. Taz's chant stopped. He gripped the bars of his cell, his head cocked, listening. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. My sign, he said, his voice barely a whisper. They have come. Outside, the mob's angry shouts turned to cries of fear and confusion. The torchlight revealed them. Dozens of mounted Apache warriors cresting the low hills at the edge of town, their painted faces demonic in the flickering light. They were an apparition of vengeance, silent and deadly. They carried rifles and bows, and the moon glinted off the tips of their lances. They had seen the torches. They had heard the gunshots. They had come for their chief. The battering ram was dropped with a thud. Thorne's lynch mob, so brave and righteous moments before, was suddenly caught between the impenetrable jail and a force of nature they had long feared but never truly believed they would face. The war had come to redemption. The standoff at the jail became a three-sided nightmare. Inside, Kale and Ben were trapped, their duty now a terrible, multi-headed beast. Outside, the lynch mob, their courage evaporating like morning mist, huddled together in the middle of the street, their rifles turning from the jail to the silent, menacing ring of warriors that now encircled the town center. And on the hills, the Chiricahua sat on their ponies, patient as stone, their presence a promise of annihilation. The midnight bells had rung, and now there was only a dead, terrifying silence, broken by the whimpering of a wounded man and the crackle of the mob's torches. Kale peered through the window slat. He could see the warriors clearly, led by the young, fierce Geronimo. They were not attacking. They were waiting. They had sealed the town. Thorne's mob was their quarry, but the jail was the key. They're going to burn us out, Ben whispered, his voice trembling slightly. They'll burn the whole town down to get to him. No, Kale said, his mind racing. They're smarter than that. This is a siege. They'll wait for us to run out of water, or for the mob to get desperate and do something stupid. From his cell, Taza spoke, his voice calm and measured. They will wait until dawn. When the sun touches the mountain, they will attack. They will kill all these men, and then they will tear down this building stone by stone. It is a matter of honor. Kale turned to face his uncle. You can stop them. Give me your word you will tell them to stand down, and I will let you go. It was a desperate gamble, an abandonment of the law he had just killed a man to uphold. But the alternative was the massacre of the entire town. Taza looked at him, his dark eyes seeming to see into Kale's very soul. And if I do, what then? These men, he gestured with his head toward the street, will not forget. The moment my warriors are gone, they will come for me again. And for you. You will have betrayed your law for nothing. You will be a man with no people, no law, and no honor. Is that what you want? He was right. The bitter truth of it settled in Kale's gut like a stone. Releasing Taza would solve nothing. It would only sign his own death warrant and prove Thorne's accusations correct. There was no easy way out. The bridge he had tried to be was now the battlefield itself. He had to change the equation. Ben, Cale said, his voice hardening with a new resolve. Cover the back. He strode to the heavy oak door, the wood splintered and scarred from the ram. Thorn, he yelled. Elias Thorn. There was a fearful silence from the street. Then Thorn's voice, strained and shaky. What do you want, Blackwood? You have a choice, Thorn. You and your men can lay down your guns right now, walk back to your homes, and this might end peacefully. Or you can stay out there between me and them. Taza's warriors don't care about you. They came for me to free their chief. But if you're in the way when they come, they will ride right through you. It was a lie, a colossal bluff. He knew the warriors' primary anger was for the mob that threatened their chief. But fear was a powerful motivator, and Cale was banking on Thorn's instinct for self-preservation. You're lying, Thorn shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Cale called back. Look at them, Thorn. Do they look like they're here to negotiate? I'm the one they have a quarrel with. I arrested their chief. Let them have me. Disperse your men, and you might live to see the sunrise. He was offering himself up, trying to position himself as the single target, the lightning rod for all the hatred. From the darkness on the hill, a single rider detached from the main group and walked his pony slowly forward into the torchlight. It was Geronimo. He stopped 100 yards from the jail, raised his rifle over his head, and let out a piercing war cry that was answered by every warrior on the ridge. It was a signal. The time for waiting was coming to an end. The mob began to break. The raw, primal terror of the war cry did what Cale's words could not. A few men at the back, their faces pale with fear, dropped their torches and rifles and simply ran, disappearing into the darkness of the alleys. Their panic was contagious. Others followed, their desire for vengeance extinguished by their more immediate desire to live. Hold the line, you cowards! Thorn bellowed, but his authority was gone. He was no longer a wealthy rancher leading a righteous posse. He was just a man standing in the path of an avalanche. Within a minute, his mob of 50 had dwindled to a dozen frightened, isolated men. Thorn stood, for a moment, in stunned disbelief, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He looked at the jail, then at the silent line of warriors, then back at the jail. He spat on the ground, threw his rifle down in disgust, and stalked away into the night. The street was suddenly empty, save for the discarded torches that guttered on the ground and the wounded man who groaned near the door. The immediate threat of the lynch mob had vanished. Now it was just Cale, Ben, and their prisoner facing down an army. Cale unlocked the cell door. The metallic click was as loud as a gunshot in the silence. Taza looked at him, his expression unreadable. What are you doing? The mob is gone, Cale said. He opened the door fully. Your fight was with them. They threatened you. Now, I'm asking you to end this. Walk out of here. Ride back to your camp. Tell your warriors to go in peace. Ben stared at him, aghast. Sheriff, you can't. This isn't about the law anymore, Ben, Cale said, never taking his eyes off Taza. It's about survival. Theirs and ours. Taza stepped out of the cell. He was a free man. He walked to the front door of the office, his hand resting on the splintered wood. He looked back at Cale. You would do this? After all that has happened? You would let me go? I'm not letting you go, Cale said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm choosing to prevent a war. I am choosing the town. I am choosing your people over a piece of paper that says this land belongs to men like Thorn. John Miller is still dead. You're still responsible. But hanging you for it won't bring him back. It will only get more people killed. Go, uncle. Before I change my mind. It was the ultimate act of rebellion, not against the law, but in service of a higher justice. He was finally choosing a side, and in a way none of them could have predicted, he was choosing both. Taza stood for a long moment, the weight of the decision on his shoulders. He was a war chief, honor de vengeance, but his nephew, the man of two worlds, had just offered him a third path, a bitter, complicated peace. He had faced down his own people to protect Taza, and now he was defying his own law to save the town. It was an act of profound, impossible courage. Slowly, Taza nodded. He unbolted the door and stepped out into the night. He stood alone in the street, between the jail and his warriors, and raised his hands. He began to speak in the flowing, powerful tongue of the Chiricahua. His voice carried in the night, not a command, but a counsel. He spoke of his nephew's actions, of the mob that had been faced down, of the choice that had been made. He spoke of honor, and how it was not always found in bloodshed. Cale watched from the doorway, his rifle held loosely at his side. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the meaning. He saw Geronimo lower his rifle. He saw the tension leave the shoulders of the other warriors. The siege was over. One by one, in silence, the Apache warriors turned their ponies and melted back into the darkness from which they came. Soon, they were all gone. Taza stood alone in the street for a moment longer. Then he too turned and walked to his horse, mounting it with a fluid grace. He looked back at the jail one last time, a long, deep look that passed between uncle and nephew. There was no victory in it, no defeat, only the shared weight of what had passed between them. Then he rode away, disappearing into the same hills that had birthed them both. The town of Redemption was quiet. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, bathing them in a soft, gray light. The air smelled of burnt-out torches, gunpowder, and the coming dawn. Cale stood in the doorway of his jail, the cool morning air on his face. Ben came to stand beside him. "Is it over?" Ben asked, his voice full of exhaustion and awe. Cale looked at the empty street, then to the mountains. He had arrested his own uncle to uphold the law, and then freed him to defy it. He had faced down a lynch mob and an Apache war party in the same night. He was a traitor to both sides, and perhaps the savior of both as well. "No," Cale said softly, the first true words spoken in the new quiet. It's just beginning. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man standing on a battlefield after the fighting was over, alone amidst the wreckage. But the jailhouse behind him was standing, the town was quiet, and the mountains were at peace for now. He had held the center. And for one more day, in a place called Redemption, that was enough. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. He made a compassionate choice that changed lives. Do you think more people should act on such instincts? Share your thoughts.